Picture this. You wake up, pour yourself a big glass of milk, and it's chunky. Not a smoothie, not bubble tea, just spoiled milk. Congratulations, you've just lived a day in the year 1820. Before refrigerators, keeping food fresh was a daily struggle. Forget Uber Eats. Forget even your grandma's Tupperware collection. If you wanted food to last more than a day, you had to get creative, or just really comfortable with the taste of slightly rotten. So let's take a trip back in time, before we had Frigidaires, freezers, or that one roommate who hogs all the freezer space with frozen chicken nuggets. This is the story of how humanity survived before refrigerators. Now, your first thought might be, well, duh, just use ice. And you'd be right. But getting that ice from a frozen-over lake in Massachusetts to, say, a sweltering cocktail party in the Caribbean, that was a whole other kettle of fish. And you'd want to keep that fish on ice, too. Enter Frederick Tudor, a man from Boston with an idea so crazy, his own family thought he'd been kicked in the head by a horse one too many times. In 1806, this absolute madman decided he was going to make a fortune by harvesting ice from New England ponds and selling it to people in hot climates. His first shipment was a disaster. He sent 130 tons of ice on a ship to Martinique. The problem? He hadn't figured out how to store it properly, and nobody in Martinique had any idea what to do with a giant, melting block of winter. They'd never seen solid water before. It was like trying to sell a telephone to a caveman. Tudor lost the equivalent of about $100,000 in today's money. His plan belly-flopped harder than a penguin on a water slide. Lesser men would have given up, maybe opened a sensible haberdashery. But not Freddy Boy. Oh no. This frosty fanatic was just getting started. He experimented for years, learning that sawdust was an amazing insulator. He designed and built specialized ice houses, double-walled structures packed with insulation that could keep ice frozen for months, even through the summer. He basically invented the world's greatest cooler, but for a whole town. He then launched a marketing campaign that would make Don Draper blush. He targeted bartenders, giving them free ice for a year. Why? Because once people tasted a cocktail that wasn't the temperature of bathwater, they were hooked. Suddenly, a cold drink went from an impossible luxury to a must-have status symbol. Tudor's ice became the talk of the town, the island, and eventually the world. This dude, who everyone called the Ice King, ended up shipping his frozen water all the way to India, creating a global trade network built on frozen water. He became fabulously wealthy, all because he looked at a frozen pond and thought, I bet someone in Calcutta would pay good money to lick that. And he was right. So next time you pop an ice cube into your drink, pour one out for Frederick Tudor, the original ice-cold hustler who taught the world brain freeze. But what if you didn't have a friendly neighborhood ice merchant shipping you frozen chunks of Boston? What if you were, say, a Roman legionary on a 10-year tour of Gaul with a serious hankering for bacon? Well, for most of human history, the answer was simple. Salt. Salt is the OG preservative, the undisputed heavyweight champion of not rotting. The science is pretty simple. Most of the nasty little bacteria that turn your delicious steak into a fuzzy science experiment need water to survive. Salt, through the magic of osmosis, is a microscopic bully that rips the water right out of those bacterial cells, leaving them shriveled up and deader than disco. It also dehydrates the food itself, turning a juicy slab of pork into something you could probably use to paddle a canoe in an emergency. The Egyptians used salt to mummify their pharaohs, and if it's good enough to keep King Tut looking fresh for 3,000 years, it's probably good enough for your ham. The Romans valued it so much they paid their soldiers in it. The word salary literally comes from the Latin word for salt, sal. Imagine your boss sliding a big bag of Mortons across the desk on payday. This gave us foods like salt cod, a fish so thoroughly salted and dried it became a rock-hard plank of protein that could last for years. To make it edible, you had to soak it in water for days, changing the water over and over to pull the salt back out. The result was, well, it was food. It wouldn't kill you. Probably. But it's the reason your Scandinavian ancestors were able to sail across the Atlantic without getting scurvy. They were powered by stubbornness and really, really salty fish. Now, salting is great, but let's be honest, the flavor profile is a bit one note. It's salty. So, what if you wanted to add a little something extra, a little razzle-dazzle to your preserved pig? That's when humanity decided to take their meat and give it the hot box treatment. I'm talking, of course, about smoking. For thousands of years, people noticed that meat hung near a fire lasted longer. Turns out, it wasn't just a coincidence. The heat from the fire helps to dry out the surface of the meat, and the smoke itself is a multi-talented superstar. It's acidic, which the bacteria hate, and it's loaded with natural chemical compounds, like formaldehyde. Yes, that formaldehyde, that are fantastic at telling germs to kindly get lost. The process created a kind of protective, smoky skin, a delicious, flavor-packed force field against decay. It gave us smoked salmon, a food so luxurious we still eat it at fancy brunches. It gave us jerky, the original road trip snack. And it laid the groundwork for the greatest culinary art form known to man. Barbecue. That's right. Every time you're enjoying a perfectly smoked brisket, you are partaking in an ancient food preservation technique. You're not just eating, you're connecting with your ancestors. So while our ancestors weren't exactly hosting backyard cookouts with tiki torches and kiss the cook aprons, they were masters of fire and smoke, turning perishable meat into something that could last through a long, hard winter. It was survival, with a side of delicious, smoky flavor. By the late 1700s, humanity had gotten pretty good at not dying from rotten food. But all these methods had a downside. Salted food was salty. Smoked food was smoky. What if you wanted to preserve food so it tasted, well, like food? This was the problem facing one short, angry Frenchman with a serious world domination complex: Napoleon Bonaparte. You see, Napoleon famously said that an army marches on its stomach, and his army was huge, marching all over Europe. The problem was, their supply chain consisted mostly of salted beef and hardtack biscuits that could break your teeth. Morale was low, and you can't conquer Russia when your troops are dreaming of a decent stew. So, in 1795, the French government offered a massive prize of 12,000 francs to anyone who could invent a new, better way to preserve food for their armies. For over a decade, nobody could crack it. Then along came this guy, Nicolas Appert. Appert wasn't a scientist. He was a chef, a candy maker, and a brewer. He was a guy who knew his way around a kitchen. He spent 14 years experimenting, driven by a simple theory. What if the air itself was what made food go bad? He figured if you could remove the air, the food would last. He was wrong, but in the most brilliantly right way possible. Appert's method was painstaking. He'd place food, everything from vegetables to meat broths, into thick, wide-mouthed glass jars, kind of like champagne bottles. He would cork them very carefully, seal them with wax, and then boil them in water for a long time. And it worked. It worked beautifully. He presented his invention to the French government, and in 1810, he got his 12,000 francs. He became a hero. The funny thing is, he had no idea why it worked. He was an accidental genius. Appert's invention, which we now call canning, was revolutionary. Soon, an Englishman named Peter Durand patented a similar idea using tin cans instead of glass, which were less likely to break when you dropped them on the battlefield. This led to a whole new problem. The can opener wouldn't be invented for another 40 years. For decades, soldiers had to open their canned rations with bayonets, rocks, or even rifle butts. Eating was its own little battle. But for the first time in history, you could eat peas in December that tasted like peas, not like a salt lick or a campfire. So far, these methods make a certain kind of sense. But humanity's quest for preservation has taken some weird turns. Turns that lead us to dark, creepy basements and into the murky depths of a swamp. First up, the root cellar, the original basement fridge. Before we had crisper drawers, we had dirt drawers. A root cellar is just a cool, dark, humid place underground. The stable, chilly temperature of the earth dramatically slows down the decomposition process for tough root vegetables like potatoes, carrots, and turnips. It's why your grandparents might have had a weird, spider-filled room in their basement that was always full of potatoes. It wasn't a spud-based horror movie setup, it was a time-honored preservation technique. But it gets weirder. Let's talk about bog butter. Yes, you heard me. Bog butter. For centuries, people in Ireland and Scotland would take huge chunks of butter or animal fat, pack them in wooden containers or wrap them in animal hides, and then just bury them in a peat bog. Now, you might be asking, why in the name of all that is holy would you do that? And the answer is science. A peat bog is a bizarre, magical environment. It's super low in oxygen, highly acidic, and very cold. It's like a natural preservation chamber. Archaeologists have found barrels of bog butter that are thousands of years old and are still technically edible. Now, edible is a strong word. Over the centuries, the butter loses its fatty texture and takes on a waxy, crumbly consistency, kind of like a pungent, gamey cheese. It was likely a way to store surplus dairy, and some think it might have even been buried as a ritual offering to the gods. Because nothing says, "Please bless our harvest," like a 50-pound lump of swamp cheese. From the Ice King's global empire to Napoleon's canned chicken, from salty fish planks to butter buried in a swamp, the fight against decay has been one of humanity's longest and most creative battles. It was a constant, exhausting effort that dictated what people ate, where they lived, and how they survived. So, the next time you open your refrigerator and are greeted by that beautiful artificial cold, take a moment to appreciate it. Thank that humming metal box for the fresh milk, the crisp vegetables, and the leftover pizza that hasn't turned into a petri dish. Be grateful that you don't have to soak a fish plank for 3 days or dig up your dinner from a bog. Because living in the past was tough, and often it was chunky.